What was the please stop school presentation that you witnessed? This was in effing college. Our bio finals were to present on any topic that was related to biology. A group was presenting the types of protection for sex. Not once did they refer to any body parts or fluids by their scientific names. So yes, they literally had male private part, male pleasure sauce, and lady private part on slides and read off them. Everyone kept glancing over at our professor, who had this look like he was just constantly cleaning his glasses, but he couldn't believe what he was witnessing. They got Kentucky F'd on grading. Story 2. Not a presentation, but during our school assemblies, we often had student performers, which were usually medically inclined individuals or theater kids doing a scene or monologue. One kid decided to do a stand-up comedy routine about a girl giving him a BJ. So awkward, and the principal had to interrupt him. Story 3. It was my sophomore year English class. This kid who was reading his essay in front of the class and started to stumble over some of the words. The teacher recognized the words and found the essay the kid plagiarized and started helping him read it. The kid didn't understand what was happening and just thanked the teacher and kept reading. Edit. This was in 2004. The teacher found the essay on the internet. He gave the kid a day to try again. The kid was stumbling over the words because they were big ones he'd evidently never seen before. Everything else is fuzzy since it was over 13 years ago. Cheers. Thanks for the upvotes. Story 4. I studied and went to school for computer security. In an Introduction to Computer Security course, we had to do a project on social engineering. A student decided that for his project, he was going to find a way to gain access to a chosen website. He found a small local business website, identified that the domain was registered to an email address from a local ISP, called the ISP to reset the password. They asked him for his last 4 of his SSN, so he hung up. He found the phone number of the business, so called them and pretended to be from the ISP, offering 3 months free if the person did a 5-question survey. They accepted and answered some BS questions. Then he asked for the last 4 of the guy's SSN, which they gave no problem. He then called the ISP with the last 4, got them to reset the password of the email account. He then logged into the email and used it to get the domain registrar to send a password reset to the email, which he used to reset the password of the domain account and deleted the email. He recorded all phone calls and screenshotted the whole process. As he presented all these, we kept expecting him to say, "But that would be illegal, so I didn't do X." But he went all the way. The professor finally stopped him after he said he'd logged into the domain register and told him to destroy everything and never speak of it again. I think the professor was a bit nicer than he could have been, potentially to the point of accomplice, in telling him to destroy evidence. Story 5. In history class, we all had to do a presentation about some sort of injustice in the world. One kid chose a prison camp for his topic. All his PowerPoint slides were photos of men being stripped, chained, whipped, sodomized, and forced to give BJs. We were 13. Yeah, this seems a little too intentional. You don't just accidentally stumble upon these videos and then choose to apply them to your PowerPoint slideshow. Nice try. Story 6. In Speech 101 in college, we had to pick a children's book and voice act each character. That was it. That was the entire assignment. Well, one student decided to take it to the next level. He chose a Bernstein Bear book and decided to not only do voice acting for every single one of the characters, but also act it out. It was physically uncomfortable to watch this guy scramble around the room and pretend to be bears and other animals. It was not well done. It was awful. Story 7. The one where my school got ripped off by paying a guy who claimed to be SpongeBob to come talk to us about drugs. He did look kind of like Tom Kenny, I guess. Story 8. For 8th grade talent show, 2 girls sang the Mr. Bladell song. Mr. Bladell was a good-looking, recently college-graduated teacher that basically was about how cute they thought he was. Even then, it was incredibly uncomfortable, and I remember looking at the teacher's face, and he didn't seem very amused. Story 9. I've told this on Reddit a few times, but it's truly unforgettable. Smart kid in the class was giving a deeply sourced PowerPoint presentation on religion in Europe. He opens up his files, proceeds to click on his project named Inward. He says, clearly wasn't paying any attention when I named my file. He gives the presentation, he stutters and sweats bullets, while we watch in utter disbelief. The word is sitting there on the top of the file heading the whole time. This was during a study abroad semester while attending a cultural communication class. He had to rot in his own crap after that. Yeah, no way to play this off, nowhere to hide, especially if you tried to change it, that would be even more obvious. You're just a racist, buddy. Not okay. Story 10. It's me. I did this. I cringe about it to this day. Nearly nearly 20 years later. I was 16 and in high school. My high school was going to a spring talent show. I wanted to be in the talent show and show off my talents. The problem was, my actual talents are not ones that I could show off at a talent show, so I decided to try singing. I've never sung in my life. I've never had voice lessons. I was in my prime weeb stage and chose an anime song to sing. I didn't know any actual Japanese, I just memorized the lyrics from hearing the song so many times. Luckily, I didn't make it past auditions, but several people saw an overweight girl in a Sailor Moon shirt try to sing Butterfly, despite her never done any singing or voice training ever in her life. Nearly 20 years later, and remembering it keeps me awake at night. Story 13. We were supposed to have Arnold Schwarzenegger come to our school sometime around 1999 or 2000. Principal was hyping it up for weeks. Then, about 4 days before his arrival, it was announced on Friday that he wasn't coming. Fast forward to Monday, during morning announcements, it's announced he's changed his mind and is coming to our school tomorrow as planned. Come Tuesday morning, everyone is excited. We're all amped to meet the Terminator. A handful of parents even came with VHS copies of his movies, posters, etc. We're all going to our gym/auditorium, taking our seats. Principal takes the stage, takes a moment to make some announcements, award honor roll, perfect attendance, etc. Finally, she starts hyping up Arnold Schwarzenegger. Everyone is excited and on edge when she basically says, "Here's Arnie," and the vice principal in a leather jacket holding a shotgun, not a toy one either, and spends 30 to 40 minutes trying to hype us up for the F-Cat, all the while doing the absolute worst impression of Arnold Schwarzenegger I've ever heard. Once we realized Arnold wasn't there, people started shouting, screaming at the principals for lying to us, along with some of the parents who came to this. I do hope someone has footage of this meltdown of a bunch of K5 kids shouting and screaming at the principals because Arnold Schwarzenegger didn't come to our school, because I clearly remember 2 to 3 people having camcorders. Edit. As for some of the questions, Arnold was scheduled but canceled last minute on not only my school, but my cousin's, who he was supposed to go to on Wednesday. Instead, he only went to one school in my city, which I don't remember which one at the moment, but I'll add it if I remember it. Yes, the principals apologized the next day, and the vice principal changed schools the following school year. I have absolutely no idea why he thought bringing a shotgun was a good idea, but I think he was attempting to look the part, which, considering his massive gut, really didn't help. Story 14. When I was a 9th grade student, we had to present the poems we made in English class. Most people wrote about embracing their culture, loving their friends, etc. And then there was that one kid who recited a lifestyle poem, which compared fat people to beached whales and said that people who don't work out will die before they're 20. Story 15. In grade 8, my English teacher asked us to do a presentation in the form of propaganda. The examples she used included Hitler's campaign to brainwash Germans into thinking Jews were bad. So naturally, my group thought that propaganda equals bad, and we made a presentation asking people to join a movement to ban obesity and obese people. We didn't actually hate obese people. In fact, I was overweight at the time. We just thought the point of the assignment was to be provocative and brainwash the students with hatred. Our teacher asked us to stop the presentation and said we were being ostracizing. My project partner pointed out that she literally showed us Hitler propaganda as an example, but the teacher said regardless, our project was not appropriate for school. So we redid the project, and this time our propaganda involved asking people to join a book club. Our English teacher was elated. Edit. So I was revisiting my old school assignments, and apparently I wrote an essay for the same teacher, but this time it was AP English. And guess what? It was about the same topic, but it was in a much nastier tone. The teacher wanted it in the style of A Modest Proposal by Jonathan Swift, which, if you don't know, is a satirical essay proposing that we eat children of poor families to alleviate poverty. And so my proposal was about how to solve junk food addicts racking up healthcare costs. My solution was to force addicts to go to rehab, and rehab was supposed to be the local landfill. They would live at the landfill and eat the garbage. The analogy was that junk food equals garbage. I think I actually got very high marks on this essay. I wonder if my teacher remembered the obesity propaganda I did 5 years earlier, but I truly believe this essay was a lot nastier. Yet my teacher was okay with it. Story 17. Not a school, but when I was in high school, my church youth group went to this church camp. For those uninitiated, Thursday nights are normally the really emotional nights. Well, this camp was different. Thursday night, the guy that started the camp comes on stage and begins giving a bunch of middle school and high school boys and girls the sex talk. All I remember from that night was the quote, "Just because there's a hole doesn't mean you have to stick something in it." Story 18. Compared to some other stories in here, this is minor, but it was a group project for one of my literature classes. There were 5 people in this group. According to the rubric for this assignment, everyone was supposed to have equal speaking parts. One of the members of this group would just not stop talking. Half their presentation was just her talking, and she went on about each of her slides for like 5 minutes. The rest of her group members had like 1 or 2 slides each, and she had, if I recall correctly, 5 or 6. She would also interject into the other group members' parts to add her opinions. The look on my professor's face screamed, "Just shut up already," every time she talked. Story 19. Not a literal presentation really, but we had an assembly in high school where the students that helped plan homecoming would announce the nominations for homecoming court. It always had a cute little theme and like a short skit involved. Well, at one point, the audio they were using as the cue for the skit failed. They just kind of paused for technical difficulties, but this one girl from the planning committee started singing a random Disney song a cappella while improvising a dance to go along with it. I guess as a distraction from them trying to fix the audio? She kept trying to get people to join in with her, but nobody did, and she eventually just kind of trailed off mid-song and started pouting that nobody would sing with her. Then, once they got the audio fixed for the skit, she pouted and snapped the way through the rest of her lines, which made everything even more uncomfortable. The other famous one was when a girl in our class running for student government referenced a hashtag that she was trying to make popular during her campaign speech to the whole school. The hashtag was something catchy about her having a big ass. There was a genuine collective yikes from the crowd when she said it. I don't think she got selected. Story 20. Us. We were to make a film retelling the story of Hamlet. It was supposed to be 5 minutes. Being the creative nutcases we were, we made a 22-minute film complete with a commercial break which made fun of prior books we had read. Ophelia was a Jersey Shore whore who refused to take her Prozac. Polonius was a perverted Greek philosopher, and Hamlet was a depressed emo. Sword fights were video game based with Mortal Kombat themes. We presented it to the class and were cut off after 5 minutes. We received an A-. Yeah, so this is one of those projects where the teacher's probably like, okay, this isn't appropriate, but this is also a job well done. So yeah, gotta give you credit. A-, rock solid there. Story 21. During nursing school, a guy decided to use My Little Pony figures as props to a seminar room of about 100 people. He told the class that he would refer to himself as his pony name for the duration. Don't remember what it was. Also, not that this is relevant, but he wore a black leather trench coat and it was pretty hot in the room, yet he never took it off. Cringe. Story 22. A teacher asked us to compare the cells in our body to anything we can think of. Obviously, some students compared the parts of the human cell to schools, jails, libraries, normal things, right? Well, this one student that sits next to me had a different idea. These were group projects, keep in mind. This girl managed to strong-arm her group to compare the human cell to the infamous webcomic Homestuck. She did this successfully. Not only did I feel dirty, but her group felt worse for having their names on it. Story 23. We had this senior talent show that a few male students could sign up for. No idea why it was only guys, or how the few people even got nominated for it. And they all had to do their own act. Some sang, some danced, some put on a funny skit. Possibilities were endless. Well, each year, someone who never got told they weren't good at singing would end up on stage. One time, this guy did the evolution of boy band songs, and it was just below average singing for, no joke, 15 minutes straight. Bonus skit that I'm glad didn't stop because it was hilarious. One guy did a wrestling skit with different movie characters, and my friend was the announcer. When Indiana Jones got into the ring, my friend announced, "It's the BDSM bad boy himself." And somehow that slipped by all the school staff members and made it into the DVDs the school sold. Another friend of mine sang Disney princess songs while wearing a Sonic hat and got second place, and at least 3 girls gave him their number. Story 24. Was in a video/filmmaking class in high school. One group of boys did a parody of those Gatorade commercials where the athlete's sweat is colored like Gatorade, but it was a sweaty guy self-pleasuring. Apparently, there's a Gatorade male pleasure juice shot, but the teacher just turned that crap off immediately before it got that far. Story 25. Environmental science. For our final project in the class, we were allowed to talk about. Dude decides to do his project on global cooling. Buddy was up there for 7 minutes explaining to the class how the Earth has been getting colder and colder, and how it's eventually going to cause problems to other species. Teacher was really passionate about this class, and you could see her squirming in her seat the whole way through the presentation. Whole thing was a big WTF. His sources were online forums. Story 26. Two come to mind. Rural, public school in Kansas. Speaker comes to talk to us before prom. Very clear it's an abstinence-only speaker. Talked about our diamond zones, the crotch area for men, the whole torso from crotch to neck for women, and how we shouldn't let people touch us in our diamond zones, because that's where our secret treasure is. Wickedly smart student in my physics class was giving a presentation on event horizons. Was actually really interesting. Definitely knew his stuff. Then, in the last third of the presentation, he starts talking about how the time dilations around event horizons can actually explain why fossils are carbon dated wrong, and that it can help us prove that the dates in the Bible actually line up with science. It was actually somewhat interesting to see just how quickly he went off the rails. Story 27. Opioid awareness, literally a few months ago. Started with them blasting the entirety of the Disturbed cover of Sound of Silence, while a slideshow of images containing sad stock photos with the watermark all over, random shots of really dark nighttime photos, and tons of poorly photoshopped drug images trudged on ever so slightly. Then, two women told us the harrowing stories of how their sons died of opioid overdoses. Incredibly emotional. Several people cried. Real downer, basically. Then, a DEA agent comes up and tries to act all bad cop. He calls us, an assembly of high school students, grades 9 through 12, effing morons. The principal was not pleased. He is then followed by a nurse who is there to tell us all the physical effects of opioid addiction and withdrawals and all that. And she did talk about that, but the whole time she was running around practically screaming jokes and doing crappy over-the-top gags trying to be the comic relief in an opioid assembly, where two women shared the stories of how their children died. What the F was she doing being that loud and crazy? Everyone came out of the whole thing with the general attitude of, yeah, F opioids, but also F that whole presentation. Story 28. This one happened a few months ago only, actually. We were in law and entrepreneurship class, and we had to make a presentation about a made-up company we would invent, and the two class clowns made their presentation about a drink. And their slogan was, quote, if she's drunk, she can't say no. And neither of them wanted to read it. They just wanted to skip over it, but the teacher made them read it and asked them to go back to their places. I had never seen someone so calm and angry at the same time. When the class started hesitatingly clapping, the prof said, stop, this isn't worth clapping for. The next week, the two of them went around all the classes during the morning reading time to present a video about consent. Very apropos resolution by the teacher. No clapping, you're going to read it so everyone knows, even though you were probably joking. Douchebag thing to say. Major jerk thing to say, and now you have to present videos about consent. Good job. Lesson learned, hopefully. Story 29. Student gave a presentation on the need to strap laser beams to deer heads that trigger sonic waves so that the deer are detracted from crossing highways. Context. I wasn't the grading teacher, but I was asked to supervise the teacher. Theme was supposed to be on how to solve a problem youth is facing. Example, how to be a solutionary. Student was in 10th grade. Story 30. In my high school current events class, two freshman girls got a little lost in their research about ISIS. They somehow connected this terrorist group to the magic bullet theory used in the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Me and a few other seniors were holding back laughter the entire presentation. Story 31. In high school, a student died in a car accident where she was driving. There was no record that stated she was distracted by her phone or anything, but the school decided to have an assembly shortly after talking about distracted driving and using her as an example, telling the whole school she'd be alive if she was doing what she was supposed to. So this is in very poor taste, whoever made this decision. Like, whether it's true or not, you don't use like a recently deceased student as an example. That's very insensitive. My goodness. Story 32. In fourth year university, we had a year-long seminar course of 15-ish students. Our big end-of-year project was to give a 3-hour lecture on one of the historical figures we'd studied. One guy got up there and was so nervous, he blasted through his content in less than an hour, without hardly taking a breath. Nobody could understand him. The prof didn't step in to tell him to slow down, and he was sweating so profusely his shirt was soaked through. I felt really bad for him, but oh god. Edit. The class was taken several years ago. He had more like 8 or 9 students. The presentation still took the majority of the semester. Brutal. Story 33. Presentation on World War II. Student had just discovered that all neat transitions you can use between slides and decided to use a different one each slide. They used the flashing heart transition between a photo slide of a massive grave and a photo slide of Hitler. Story 34. I was doing work experience with a bunch of special needs kids at school. We were watching a play that I don't remember the name of, which was about someone who was in a gang or something and got HIV. Instead of having any action or dialogue, the story was told through characters standing out in the front and telling the story to the audience. It was dull as hell. The special needs kids were getting so restless, and I couldn't blame them, because it was terrible. Story 35. In middle school, there was a school-wide assembly for telling kids not to use the bathroom anywhere other than a bathroom. Kids were peeing and pooping in hallways because the handbook never said you had to use a bathroom. Edit. I wasn't a participant in the bathroom behavioral problems. Edit 2. People are confused as to why you would do this. I honestly have no clue. The younger kids would do the dirty work, while most older kids did a downgrade of it. It was that super weird trend. Edit 3. Just wanted to say that the school couldn't really do anything other than tell them to stop, because in fact it wasn't in the handbook. Of course, you can't do it in front of an administrator or teacher, but nothing was stopping you. Okay, that being said, would it really be that hard to quickly make an amendment to the handbook or just rewrite the whole damn thing? Because it sounds like it's omitting some pretty fine details there. Story 36. My junior year in French class, this one girl did not know French at all, despite taking the class for 4 years. She was pretty open about it too, laughing and saying how she didn't need this class in the middle of the presentation. The teacher asked her to sit. Edit. I forgot to add that prior to being called out, she was standing in front of her presentation, half-assedly pointing at it and laughing. At one point, she was trying to say, I'm happy, but she couldn't think of it and finally just said, Je suis am happy, okay? Story 27. I never did this, but my dream was to include a slide of a bear running towards us, and then me yelling, "Oh no, a bear!" and then quickly going to the next slide, saying, "Whoa, that was close," and then going on like nothing happened. I have a feeling I would have ended up in this thread. Story 28. Sophomore year of high school, we were tasked with bringing in an object from home and giving a presentation on how/why the object explains you as a person. Kid brought in a knife, not a big one, but a knife nonetheless. He actually gave a decent presentation, but ended getting expelled because of it later that day. Story 29. I was in a Japanese film class for a credit I needed, and the final project was some open-ended paper where you got to choose the topic, and our Japanese-born teacher told us some story about a creepy neckbeard who did his on Japanese adult content and how no one should do anything like that. Anyway, on the day it was due, the creepiest neckbeard stereotype I've ever seen, who was in my class, presented his long-ass cringe presentation on Japanese adult content in the class that no one wanted to hear, already knowing the teacher has seen this crap before and wasn't about it at all. Edit. Just to clarify, his main talking point was about how Japanese people have a greater appreciation for big boobs than Americans. It wasn't some academic treatise on sexual norms or gender expectations in adult content or anything. Story 30. In a class about geography with a mix of regional culture, my freshman year of college, the professor gave a presentation on different types of Japanese art, such as paintings, sculptures, pottery, and whatnot. At the end of the presentation, she turned to the class of 80-plus students and said, quote, "What other kinds of Japanese art do you guys know about?" Someone from the very back of the room, a row behind me, shouted out, "Hentai!" for some reason. A number of students groaned quietly to themselves, thinking this couldn't end well, but the professor had no clue what hentai was. She asked him to explain, and the guy just stuttered out, it's like anime, I think. So the professor says pretty cheerfully, "Let's look up some examples." At this point, anyone who knows what hentai is has already forsaken life and is actively trying to will themselves into the void, myself included, as she goes to the computer connected to the massive projector screen and pulls up her internet browser. Thank God she had a tab already open to another video she wanted to show us, and either realized we didn't have time to get off track or got immediately distracted by it and forgot her quest entirely. Class resumed as normal. That guy got away with it, and most of us returned to the typical dissociating we did in that class. I don't know if that professor really didn't know what hentai was. She did seem kind of innocent in regards to internet horrors, or was just feigning ignorance to make us sweat. I sometimes wonder if the former, if she looked it up later and realized how awkward that class could have been. Story 31. Ooh, do I have a good one. When I was in school, we were asked to create a project that would help solve some issues in our environment. Anyway, this one guy, who's probably one of the dumbest people I've ever met, and I don't say that lightly, suggested the idea of flying cars. And his reasoning for why it would help the environment was because, quote, Then we wouldn't use so much gas, just like airplanes. And I just sat there like, what does he think airplanes run on? Effing pixie dust? Story 32. During our practice rounds for senior presentations, a girl got up with her PowerPoint that had paragraphs of text on each slide and then proceeded to read the paragraphs word for word from her note cards. The teacher stopped her and asked her if this is how her whole presentation was, and when she responded yes, the teacher stopped her and asked her to change her presentation. She wasn't understanding what was wrong, so we kindly gave her some feedback. She redid the presentation a few days later, but the original was rough. Story 33. I was a teacher's aide at my son's school, and I sat in on his class one day as a first grader did show and tell. She held up a book and said, "This is my diarrhea." Half the class looked confused, and the rest looked intrigued. She continued to mix up diary with diarrhea for several more sentences, as the teacher and I were silently crying with hysteria. If just one kid had laughed, we would have jumped in, but everyone listened with respect and applauded at the end, so we moved on. Yet who would have thought in a story like this, in this situation, that the students would be mature and respectful, and it's the grown-ups in the room that, are secretly 5-year-olds at heart and think it's funny. Haha, diarrhea. Gotta love it. Story 34. In 8th grade, we each had to do a PowerPoint presentation on some historical event. The resident smartass/elitist gamer kid did his in the style of zero punctuation, talking fast, trying to go for British, dry, snarky humor, and putting snarky, comedic slides in his presentation. I don't even remember what it was about. I just remember him trying way too hard to be Yahtzee when I literally was the only other person in the room who knew what that was. No one was impressed, not even me, and I was one of the closest people in that room he had to a real friend. If I recall correctly, the teacher actually got really annoyed at his presentation because of how he tried to focus on a gimmick rather than get the point across. Story 35. Grade 11 physics, we were told to do a presentation which would account for 30% of our grade. The curriculum was new, and the cumulative project being worth 30% was mandated by the province. Also, the teacher was new and didn't provide a lot of direction. This was fine for most of us, but it wasn't fine for Chris. He spent 30 minutes describing the physics of a perpetual motion machine. It was not a debunking. Very awkward. Story 36. High school junior English class, an easy 6 to 7 years ago, so details are fuzzy, but we had weeks to prepare a presentation alongside an informative essay that we wrote. Weeks of in-class time, 3 to 4 weeks of full 5-day, 50-minute classes for this essay, presentation, and the actual presenting. This kid in the class decided to write about the problems of procrastination. For the essay, it was a few sentences, something like, "I procrastinated and this was the result, nothing done, etc." The presentation, a few slides, all white with the default text and sizes, and it was something along the lines of, "I have nothing prepared because my topic is procrastination." The teacher was disturbingly unimpressed, and the kid threw such a fit about failing this major project. Seriously, it was a hefty portion of the class that he transferred out of the class. Story 37. Our gay principal came out to the podium and mentioned people drifting in the parking lot, and said the complaints have been a pain in his ass. Someone in the audience shouted, "At least you're used to it." We heard a gunshot in the school that day. It was apparently unrelated. Story 38. 2 girls in 9th grade sent videos of themselves self-pleasuring to a few boy classmates who obviously passed the videos along. The police came to our school and made a presentation about sex trafficking, CP content, and extortion. We all had to sign a contract promising to never send nude pictures, as long as we were under 18. The one girl's mom threw up in the school lobby after watching the video that was being sent around. Story 39. Middle school, about 15 years old, English class. One group did it about 9/11. We used the date, month, year format over here. So my guy started off with, "On the 9th of November, yeah, that was kind of embarrassing." 2 years later, different school, one of the girls from my group of friends used to get so nervous for presentations that her voice started to tremble. She sounded like a goat, literally, like a talking goat. Story 40. Second year of high school, we needed to act a chapter of a book. The teacher puts us in groups of 5, but there were 6 characters in the chapter, and 3 of them were women. But we had 2 girls in the group, so guess who ended up having a double role? Why me? Because in the words of my teammates, I was the quote, one with the most feminine face. With no options, I learned my dialogues, practiced my best attempt of a female voice, grabbed a scarf and a beanie from my mom, and went out there to embarrass myself in front of all the class. Hell yeah! Apparently, with the beanie and the scarf, I do look like a girl, because the first time someone saw me with that, he thought I was a girl from another class. That was totally what I wanted to hear in that moment. Then the play started. I was constantly switching my female character with my male character, basically just changing the beanie and scarf for a coat and changing my voice. It wouldn't be that bad if my scenes were scattered around the play, but no, they were consecutive. So there I am, exiting and entering the classroom with different outfits and voices, hoping that anyone who were walking through the hallway looked at me and think I just went nuts. Also, little detail, I get really nervous speaking in public, and it's even worse when I'm acting. And it's even worse when I'm acting, humiliating myself in public, and with my crush next to me. Almost all my scenes were me talking to my crush with the stupid beanie, the stupid scarf, my stupid attempt of a female voice, and my stupid face. We got a 17 out of 20 though, so I guess it wasn't that bad. Story 41. I had my college freshman English students present 10 minutes on their favorite hobbies, with PowerPoints and handouts. This one stoner kid decided to do his on Magic the Gathering, which I was pretty excited about since I'm an avid player. He started his presentation by announcing to the class in a booming voice, "I am a planeswalker." The next 15 minutes, 5 over the limit, he explained the lore and backstory. He never once said it was a game or fantasy series. He literally presented it as if it were fact. He sounded completely insane, describing how he loved raising the dead and waging war against elves and angels. Awkward aside, he failed my class, and we later had to play in a minor tournament. I beat him and knocked him out of the prize bracket. He was only in my area because his family had been evicted and he was living with a friend. Story 42. A kid in my middle school class, late 80s, decided to run for class president. He was one of those kids who was squarely in the middle of the student hierarchy. People knew him, but knew he was a bit off. His last name was O'Brien. Some people called him OB for short. He gets up in front of the school to give a speech and finished with his campaign slogan. To quote from a very famous US ad at the time, "OB, it's the way you should be." Yes, his campaign slogan was the one for tampons. The round of ironic applause only fueled his fervor, and he became more and more hyped up with the crowd, encouraging people to start chanting the slogan. Ugh. Story 43. In high school, there was this girl who was kinda mean. Nobody really liked her, and she later got expelled. Anyway, we were doing presentations on drugs. She chose marijuana. Part of our presentation was that we had to write notes for the other students to follow during our PowerPoint. Instead, she wanted to write a quiz, so we would have to fill in the answers as she went along. She included ridiculous questions, like, how much marijuana does it take to overdose? She also never really answered that question. The very last question of the quiz was, what will you choose, the drug or your life? I wrote, yes. Oh, and she pronounced it marijuana the entire time. Yeah, so clearly didn't do her research here. Is it possible to OD on marijuana and potentially pass away as a result? I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm the ignorant one here. Story 44. 12th grade English class. We were supposed to do book reports and then do presentations on the works we did. I think the teacher was phoning it in as the semester drew to a close. A guy did a presentation on Bio of a Space Tyrant by Piers Anthony, Book 1. It's a golden age type sci-fi story about a man who survives a childhood pirate attack, joins the military, and gradually works his way up to being a politician, then a dictator. Being a work by Piers Anthony, it had a few lurid sex scenes and questionable adult teenage girl relationship stuff. I'd read it because I'd had no taste as a teenager and was interested to hear something that wasn't Pride and Prejudice that I was sort of familiar with, except he focused way too much on the sketchy parts. Then, when people commented to try to get him to move on, he found and read aloud from the part early in the book where the protagonist witnesses the essay of his mother and sister by space pirates, with a smile on his face. People groaned out loud, were vocally uncomfortable. Some raised their voices to him to tell him to stop and tried to tell the teacher to get him to stop, and she didn't. Again, I think she was 100% phoning it in and just not paying attention. The guy giving the presentation just marched along with the recitation for what felt like another 2 minutes, probably 20 to 30 seconds, before the teacher stopped him. Story 45. As a teacher, one day we had to sit in the library for 4 hours after school for testing prep. Basically, there is a district/state approved slideshow that our technology coordinator had to click through, which is fine. But the worst part is that they also required that we listen to a horrible recording of someone reading every word on every slide, very slowly and with so much repetition between slides. You couldn't really read the words on the slides because there were so many. They had to make them tiny. There were like 80 slides. Oh yeah, and the recording was barely intelligible. Worst staff meeting ever. Story 46. College communications class. Had to choose a topic that was considered controversial and attempt to change viewpoints, etc. Some dude chose women in the military. Obviously had valid points for active duty combat such as weight, carrying capacity, etc. It all went downhill when he brought up menstrual cycles and hormones. Every single woman in that class was staring daggers as he rambled with little evidence, anecdotal or otherwise, how a woman could be incapacitated in the field from cramps, blood loss, and or hormonal mood changes impacting morale, as well as complications with having to add menstrual supplies to a pack. Like, dude, if a woman was struggling that much with her monthly, either from pain management, anemia, or moodiness, she would discuss treatment with her doctor. Like, all periods aren't universal blood waterfall hellscapes. Mine is only on day 1 and 2. Story 47. My sophomore year, I was in public speaking and we had to give our first speech to the class. This mountain of a boy stands up in front of the class to give his 5-minute speech of his football position and why linebackers are so important. He stood next to the lectern and not 30 seconds into his speech, he grabbed his groin. He kept pulling on it and adjusting it in his jeans. After about a minute and a half, the teacher had to stop him. I guess she wasn't watching because the other guy in class actually called him out for it, and educate the class on how to hide your nervousness and appropriate ways to keep your hands busy. Story 48. In my junior year of high school, in AP English class, one classmate made it through a 10-minute presentation on the Peace Corps while pronouncing it the Peace Corps. I knew it wasn't her fault for not having heard anyone else say it before, but I just could not handle imagining how she would feel once she realized what she'd done days, weeks, or years later. Story 49. Wasn't exactly a classroom presentation, but I was in 4th grade and my school had the woman who represented our state in the Miss America pageant that year to give us all some anti-bullying / you can do anything you set your heart to speech. We were in the gymnasium, the entire elementary school was there, 1st through 5th grade. During the speech, she mentioned that she was bullied when she was in school about having a flat chest. To a bunch of elementary school kids who haven't even thought of puberty yet. She must have mentioned it at least 3 or 4 times during the whole speech. I'm sure I wasn't the only one who was weirded out by the whole ordeal. Story 50. The time I sat for a presentation meant to be a capstone on future life plans. They had hastily thrown together about 6 slides for Profit School that's no longer in business because their practices were so shady. All the research was half-baked and it was a final project. We told the student to bring us something that was better researched and try again. I've never seen such a sad look on a parent's face. This was a theme. Story 51. In my high school, there was this one kid obsessed with Doom video games and that awful movie adaptation that was released at the same time. In one of the classes, everybody was required to freely pick up a subject and make a presentation. The Doom kid chose to live imitate every single demon sound from the series and demonstrate how the characters move in the game. Crawling, growing, and hissing went on about 30 minutes before the teacher finally decided to call the kid off stage and end the most awkward presentation that I've ever seen. Story 52. I was the one who were told to stop. My 11th grade English teacher had us do a debate on a topic with a partner. One partner would support a topic and the other would be against it. I didn't really care about it, but my friend and I chose censorship, and he opposed censorship, so I had to argue that censorship was a good thing. Even though I didn't care about the class, I do care about getting a good grade. While it was a pain to gather information, I was able to compile and gather a lot of evidence for it. The day of the debate came, and my friend thought it would be an easy win for him. He didn't realize I would have some really strong evidence about the topic, and he flustered a lot. When it was time for the class to debate with us, almost all of them tried to refute me, but I kept shutting them down, to the point that only 1 or 2 people were still talking, but they were already losing. I remembered all of them were visibly frustrated and confused. I ended up almost getting a perfect score. My partner got a low B, and words started to spread about me supporting communism. I didn't care what they think, I just wanted a good grade. Story 53. Final presentation for our final class as a senior in college. It was awkwardly placed as a 7 to 9:30 on Thursday evenings. We had to do a final presentation about a topic that was related to our major, in simplistic terms. A kid did his on weed. It was about mass-producing weed, like a scientific look of how this would work, which would have been fine, but about halfway through, he got off topic and started preaching about how weed isn't bad and people need to accept it. This went on for about 10 minutes. We kept waiting for the teacher to stop him, but she sat there patiently. He eventually moved to another slide and somehow brought it back to the same subject. I eventually left to use the bathroom because I was cringing so hard. Story 54. We had to split the class into a boys group and a girls group to get a talk about our growing bodies in the 5th grade. The boys got to watch a video and it became a huge joke because in the video, a boy said, "Daddy, why does my pee-pee get hard?" And the boys were repeating that for the whole week. Meanwhile, I was in the girls group and we didn't get a video, just a talk. The conversation literally transferred from growing bodies to boys will be boys, stay safe. I mean, come on. Boys will be boys? No, you need to teach the boys to handle themselves instead of teaching us how to handle them. Anyways, out of the many school presentations I've been forced to go to, that was one of the worst. Yeah, I agree with that. Good point. It was kind of a throwaway comment, but teach boys how to handle themselves. It's not really on the girls to handle the boys. So yeah, I get it. I agree. Story 55. I had a please stop presentation that was a school assembly, presumably paid for by said school. It was like an hour of a guy who referred to himself as a witch finder or something to that effect, who came to tell us all the dangers of witches and witchcraft. The year was 2002. He gave an extra presentation later in the evening. He gave more in-depth presentation to the Fellowship of Christian Athletes about Satanism, because Halloween was coming up. You better believe I went to that freak show. Me and one other dude sat together and looked around, realizing we were the only ones in the auditorium who weren't buying all that nonsense, fish hook and line. Sure, guy our school paid. A Satanist turned to Christ because he couldn't bear to murder children, and he came to you for redemption. None of that sounds fake at all. Again, 2002, 2003, or thereabouts. Well outside of the satanic panic. Story 56. My high school called a public assembly to address a nickname that was circulating about a girl. All 4 grades, about 200 to 300 students or so, were crammed together in a basketball court, being told why the name Slurpin' Turpin was actually bullying. Does this count as a please stop school presentation? Story 57. We had a discussion in social studies. Imagine this scenario. A girl has an internship in a nursing home. A nurse tells the girl to hold on to an older baby's arm because the nurse tried cutting her hair against her will, so it's easier to take care of, washing and stuff. The girl refused to do it and got kicked out. We all had to tell everyone our opinion on the situation and say what we'd do if we were the girl. One of my classmates said, I would help the nurse because the old lady has no right to fight against them cutting her hair. I wouldn't want to get kicked out over the hair from someone else. Just for that, I wanted to hit him so effing hard. Story 58. Psychologist here. In college, we had a couple of light-hearted classes like personal growth. We had to do a presentation of our lives, like a small 5-minute presentation about you, your family, friends, and whatever you enjoy. This guy went on to cry about how his disabled brother was bullied at school for being deaf and how it effed him up. We were all like, wow, that's so sad. Then he pulled out his backpack, like 3 personal journals he had written during that time, and started handing them to everyone so we could have a look. At that point, our teacher stopped the presentation to tell him it's not really a good idea to show something so personal and to continue without them. Story 59. Unfortunately, I was in this group presenting, but it wasn't me that was bad. Another girl in my group was presenting her slide, which was about the Titanic. She went on to explain how it sunk. Already unnecessary, but it was whatever. But instead of saying it hit an iceberg and that water got inside and yada yada yada, she just went off on how the ship was made of iron and iron is heavy because iron is iron. So the ship made of this heavy iron sank because iron was heavy, and went on like that for a solid 45 or so seconds before I cut her off. I could see everybody cringing, including my other group members and teachers watching the presentation. I still got a good grade on that one, even though I totally interrupted her part. Story 60. Okay, I posted this in another thread, but it fits, so here it is. So this was my first year of college. We had this one really awkward student in class. He was the quiet one that you didn't really want to talk to, for reasons I'll list soon. In one of our English language classes, our professor, a posh 60-something British lady, asked us to write our first essay about things we liked. Just a regular essay so she can get to know us better. Our class was one of those required classes that students from all majors had to take, so we were not an English major, hence the easy essay. So next class comes in, we hand them over, and to our surprise, the professor tells us to stand up and read them out loud. No problem for me and the rest of the class, that is, until it was the turn of the awkward guy. He stands up and reads his essay, which was about furries having incest relationships with each other. It went something like this, not word by word, but the plot was engraved in my brain. Wolfgang was entering his 40s and had a girlfriend who was 10. He impregnated her and had 2 sons. When one of his sons was old enough to get married, Wolfgang banged him and his wife on their wedding day. He also banged his grandson after he was born and had a threesome that included his mother. Now, this was the short version of it. The entire thing went on for around 5 minutes, and our professor didn't even stop him, but was horrified as she was listening to the entire thing. I think she was hooked by the horror just as the entire class was. It didn't end there. He brought sketches that include the scenes of his essay. I'm not proud to say that me and 40-something students saw a badly sketched wolf chicken that day. He ended it by plugging his DeviantArt account. Story 61. In high school, I took a class on religions. We each had to present on some religious holiday that's celebrated somewhere in the world. This one boy gets called up to present, and as the teacher is turned around, going off on some tangent to the rest of the class about whatever it was that the last person had just presented on, the boy literally sits down at the computer, which was still being projected at the front of the room, opens PowerPoint, hits New Presentation, and types Easter on an otherwise blank title slide. Then he just kept adding new slides and throwing in as much information as he could about Easter just off the top of his head until the teacher finished his tangent, turned around and asked him to present. I specifically remember one of his slides saying nothing but, "This year, Easter is on 4/20. Yeah, see, those are the important things in life that we really need to be educated on. Don't really care about the meaning of Easter, we just need to know that it's on 4/20, baby, am I right? Of course I'm joking. Story 62. Oh man, late to this party and it'll probably get buried, but I have a perfect story for this. I spent a few months working in Germany, I'm from the US, without knowing a word of German. After I went back to the US, I decided to take an intro German class as an elective. One of our projects was to present on something relating to Germany/German culture. This one kid decided to do a presentation on BMW. Awesome. BMWs are cool cars and obviously very German. Towards the end of his presentation, he talked about BMW relating to World War II and the Nazis. He ended the presentation by saying something like, "Yeah, so the Germans did some pretty bad things during World War II, but we got some pretty cool cars out of it." Silence in the classroom. Our professor, who is from Germany, clenched her jaw and told him, in front of the whole class, how disappointed she was by his final sentence. And it does not matter how great the cars were, but the atrocities committed by the Nazis cannot even remotely be mitigated by cool cars. The kid's reaction to that was something out of subreddit Watch People Die Inside. Story 63. A long while ago, during my 5th grade graduation, our principal came up and gave this speech. She wouldn't stop fake crying and referencing memes, Gangnam Style, etc., and putting up Facebook Minion memes with impact font, you know the type, up on the projector screen in the auditorium. In fact, she and a group of 2 or 3 cool kids danced Gangnam Style. Cringy AF, but hey, she was trying. Story 64. Happened a few months ago, and I had to leave the room as I couldn't contain my laughter. Chinese guy with a thick accent was giving a presentation on bulging disc herniations. When his first sentence was bulging male private part herniation, I knew I'd be in for a long, torturous 25 minutes. Alone, I may have stood a chance, but with my buddy seated next to me cracking up every time he mentioned male private part herniations as well, I had to get up and leave. Story 65. In 8th grade, the assignment was to do a prepared reading from a book that moved us. One girl reads the incest sex scene from Flowers in the Attic. Sadly, not as a mad lad. F the establishment choice. She was pretty naive and quite literal, with English as a second language. Our English teacher, a nun, was well flustered, and all the girls in my class were stunned agog. She finished the reading, and sister asked to speak with her while setting a task for the rest of us. Girl listened to the nun, confused, protesting that it was a scene that moved her. It was actually quite alarming how simple she was, but it's literally one of the very few things I remember from 8th grade. Story 66. This dates me, but a group of really preppy girls at my school did a presentation on eating disorders for the health fair. While I think they meant well, it came off as extremely body-shaming and triggering for anyone with an eating disorder. They made a slideshow of attractive curvy celebs like J-Lo and Fergie next to pictures of skeletal, anorexic women. I guess to try and send a message of don't starve yourself because this other body type is much more attractive. They sold pins and homemade t-shirts that said Paris Hilton? So not. J-Lo? That's hot. Because, F Paris Hilton for being too thin, I guess. Just some good old 2000s tone deafness that wouldn't fly today. Story 67, where some cowboy dude was having a presentation about being a effing cowboy or some dumb crap and needed a volunteer. And like an idiot, I raised my hand and I go on stage. He proceeded to show the entire school how to hogtie someone. Thanks for making me relive this trauma. Story 68. Okay, so in my class there was this one guy who wasn't popular at all. Every time the bell would ring, he would just bolt out of the classroom without talking to anyone. I was one of the few people who actually talked to him when I had the chance. Anyway, at the end of the year we had exams. At one of the exams, he came and showed us a gore video, where someone's ear was cut out, spiders were coming out of someone's mouth, etc. The teacher had her head turned most of the presentation. He got like a 7 out of 10. After that, I tell him, dude, what was that? For the next exam, don't do something like that again. He's like, sorry, I won't. Next week, he had a USB that he put in the computer. When he opened the USB, we were in shock. There were multiple folders with the names. 1. I hate N-words. 2. Hitler did nothing wrong. 3. Romanians are gypsies. 4. Muslims are animals. 5. Our teacher's name is a whore. We all looked around at each other in shock and looked at our teacher. No reaction. During the presentation, I remembered him walking in between the tables and awkwardly looking at people. Other than that, presentation was normal. Next day, 5 minutes before the end of class, the teacher stops the lectures and asks this guy why did he do what he did. He said, oh, it was just a bad joke. My classmates kind of went hard on him during those 5 minutes, and he replied, if the teacher hadn't asked you, you wouldn't have had the balls to tell me, a bit angrily. This happened in the last year of high school.